The world of football with a soccer perspective. This is Soccer Today with Duane Rollins and Kevin Laramee, live on the Sports Podcasting Network.
Good day, good night, and welcome to Soccer Today for Monday, December 2nd, 2019. The holiday season is upon us. Happy holidays already to everyone. If you just finished celebrating Thanksgiving, happy Thanksgiving once again. And we're now in the holiday mode, at least here in the studio, so you can see our new graphics. But as always, how you doing, Duane?
I'm doing well. I got the bells out. I'm here with bells on.
That's awesome. Nice. It's a real audio effect coming live from Duane's studio. But Duane, this morning, looking at the news, 9 years ago, Qatar 2022 was announced by FIFA, Mohamed El Hamair, and the rest of the federations and everything. And since then, a lot has happened, of course. The FIFA president back then, Joseph Blatter, is now banned for another 5 years from any soccer activities. Michel Platini also, they were banned for other reasons than this announcement or vote. But we know, because of allegations since then, that this vote was the beginning of the end for Joseph Blatter, but also beginning of the realization, maybe the end of our innocence, at least, maybe in a public conscious about corruption in FIFA.
Yeah, I don't know how innocent any of us were of what was happening back then. It was just so brazen this day. And the image everyone keeps passing around to this day is Sepp Blatter holding up the sign that says Qatar, and the gasps that were heard around the world. Now, I wasn't actually that surprised because I'm cynical by my nature, and there was a few articles that were written at the time that sort of laid out that they thought Qatar might win this, even though it made no sense from a lot of angles. And since that day, I've always been a little bit torn about this. I agree that, obviously the way it happened is unfortunate. Obviously, there are problems with human rights issues in the Middle East, and certainly we're seeing that particularly in the construction of the stadiums. But at the same time, I am not a believer in exclusion as a way to change things. I believe that inclusion is the way to affect change, and by just completely dismissing the possibility of having the games in the Middle East, I thought that was always the wrong approach here. But that said, clearly there were bribes. Clearly this was a corrupt system. It's for both Russia and for the DES. It got so much attention both in the UK and in the United States that it started a real impetus to make changes, particularly within the United States, which of course normally doesn't care. And obviously, like many things, if you look through history, how very powerful people have been taken down, it's often the money trail. And it was the same thing with FIFA and with Sepp Blatter. Now, I think most people listening to this understand that, but there's certainly a lot of material out there in terms of the FA raids and which is around the FIFA conference and the day it all came crumbling down, and Sepp Blatter's 5-year, tenure, I guess, ban. He's an old man now. He will not be back in the game. But the question is whether or not things have really changed. Is there a difference in how FIFA is operating, or are they just better at it now? And that's something I don't know. I do think there have been more positive moves. I just don't think it's a complete, swing that people want in terms of it to get to the level of, transparency and purity that people want. It's edging that way because, this is what happens when you hold powerful people to accommodation or accommodate. You hold them accountable is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, accountability.
Yes, is that what happens generally is that they're desperate to hold on to power so that they will make enough changes without completely changing so that they can still maintain that power. And the question we all have to hold is whether or not this is enough. And Kevin, before you jump in, I know there's a lot of people out there to this day that say they're going to demonstrate their discomfort with this Qatar and the corruption and a lack of movement that they see by not supporting Qatar, not traveling there certainly, and perhaps not even watching. To that, I say, I'll believe it when I see it. It's so hard to avoid when it happens, and I'm not judging when I say that. There's good intentions there, but once those games are on your TV, and honestly, when they're happening, you can't really tell where the games are. It's not an Olympics where there is a bit of a characteristic of the city that's involved. World Cups are just generic stadiums. So once the games kick off, they could be anywhere. We saw it in Russia. Nothing happened in Russia, right? Nothing's going to happen in Qatar. But whether or not you're willing as a person to politically follow through with your beliefs there, with your wallet, hopefully enough people do. And hopefully enough has happened so that this system is less corrupt moving forward. I don't know if it ever can be completely without corruption, though. Anything that has this much money involved generally can't be.
Yeah, well, yeah, we're talking about billions and billions and billions of dollars for sure. But also, of course, the naive side or the innocent side of me and maybe the public consciousness, like, okay, over the last few years, we haven't really got a lot of examples. There's been a few examples, isolated incidents, maybe here and there concerning corruption in FIFA. But as a general sense, it doesn't seem like it runs the show. And if you just look at the decisions taken by FIFA over the last few years, if it's for more money on the women's side recently or more development across the world of football, it seems a different direction than under Blatter and under the former system, because that system has changed. There's been new constitution, quote unquote, for FIFA itself since the corruption allegation of the early 2010s, and of course since 2014-15 when the Michel Platini and the Joseph Blatter 2.1 million euros exchange that happened with a Swiss bank. It did change a bit how things are done. There is more transparency. So the naive side of me is keen to say that, yeah, maybe it has been a bit better.
Yeah, and look, the attention this got at the time, I think, was really important. I did hits on Indian television because people were just desperate to get anyone that could talk about it at the time. And that's just how big the story was. This was a worldwide phenomenon. It got everyone talking about the corruption that was there. And that is really the first step to cleaning things up, is to have people more aware of it. This is not Andrew Jennings writing books that were read by 5,000 people in the world that, care about this stuff but ignored by the general population. This was on, Indian television. This was something that everyone was talking about it. And whether or not this continues, I don't know. We have an Olympic show, as most people know. We talked about the IOC and the changes there. I happen to think the IOC has been quicker to change things, and in some ways, certainly. Maybe they're a little disappointed by how that's going in terms of their bidding in that, but the FIFA is a little slower in it, and it's because the culture of the game is a little more ingrained than beach volleyball, so the power is harder to drag down, I think, and that's something that we're just going to keep having to fight. And the question I have in terms of whether this can truly be changed is whether or not people are still talking about issues like this. It's kind of why I wanted to bring this up. I mean, 9 years ago is not necessarily, normally people will wait till next year, right? Nice round numbers, but you might as well talk about it during the 9 years and the 7 years and the 8 years and every day in between, because otherwise, once those in power get comfortable, they'll push the envelope a little bit more. Maybe we don't have Jack Warner hiding money, or not even hiding it.
Barely hiding it, yeah.
Yeah, that doesn't exist anymore.
Or the Chuck Blazers of this world as well.
Yeah, may he rest in somewhere.
Wow. I wasn't even going to go there because, yeah, exactly. But no, and I agree. And if we look with hindsight, the decisions after, it took a long time before the following World Cup was awarded. And it, of course, famously now been awarded to United States of America, Canada, and Mexico. But for 2022, the other big bids were Japan, were Korea, the United States, were the big other candidates. And it was thought at the time that USA and Japan had a very favorable bids, and that's why people were so surprised that at the end of the day, Qatar was awarded the games. Now, with hindsight, looking at 2026, the time it took, the difference in awarding the game and the vote, and the difference of the voting parties, a lesser extent, you got the results of Canada, the United States, and Mexico in a way more transparent fashion got awarded the World Cup. So with hindsight, you see a reaction, and sometimes when the pendulum goes one way or another, You have, example, corruption at one spectrum and true transparency at the other. The pendulum has started to swing, and I think, of course, the awarding of Canada, Mexico, and the United States for the World Cup in 2026 is a direct reaction to the awarding of Qatar in 2022 and to Russia 2018 to an extent.
For sure. There's cause and effect there. Absolutely. I think that there was a sort of thought within a lot of people in FIFA that it was important to make sure that they didn't, poke the bear again, for one. I mean, had they awarded it to the Moroccan bid, it would have been very difficult to justify when you're talking about the financial differences between the two. Now, that shouldn't be everything within a bid, but just the logistics of everything around that would make that a much more difficult proposition for them to justify. So to do that again would have seemed like retaliation, and I think that played a role. I think what also plays a role is you're looking, and this is where I'll drag the IOC back into the conversation, because I do think it's difficult to separate the two when it comes to this stuff, because they both were sort of challenged at the same time, and it was really a rise up against these massive sports organizations that almost became nation states onto their own in terms of the power that they had, and still do to a lot of extent. But what you're seeing in both cases is less bidding for these games. Certainly on the Olympic side, it's really significant and a problem for the Olympics right now, particularly on the Winter Games side. But what you have is a lack of financial incentive for people to bid for massive events like this anymore. And you need to either team up like USA, Mexico, Canada did, and I think that's part of this too, or you have to be a totalitarian state. And this is kind of where the problem lies with this moving forward, because in the past, as much as this is going to sound a bit something, there were financial benefits for these places to bid for them that weren't necessarily good. So but that led to more competition, and that led to more people wanting them because they could take advantage of these things. Now, again, this was corruption, and you don't want this. But what it means for the IOC, what it means for FIFA, is that they need to scale these things down, or they need to be open to more ideas. FIFA, I think, is showing that and UEFA for that matter, are showing that they're open to this by 2020 Euros because of an anniversary in theory. But I think it's also as much of a test as anything, is playing the European championships across multiple countries next year, for those that aren't aware, if anyone. And FIFA obviously went with the triple country bid this time, and I think moving forward you'll see a lot more of those. Like, why wouldn't, say, Australia, which I think a lot of people assume might be making a bid soon, why wouldn't they throw New Zealand a little bit to share some of the burden in that, right?
Australia was one of the candidates for 2022 also. It was a fifth candidate who had a strong bid also. So I wouldn't be surprised if things have truly changed. I wouldn't be surprised that Australia would be a strong candidate for 2030.
No, absolutely. And as a final thought to this, the one thing that always makes me a little bit uncomfortable when we talk about this, there's particularly a lot of people, and particularly, following the Qatar bid, a lot of opinion being voiced here and in the United States was very judgmental of the places that were doing this. Be careful not to throw this stone too much, because you might find that the walls are glass. I would point to the history of the Salt Lake City Olympics for a very concrete example of how corruption won an Olympic bid. It's not even hidden. You don't have to say allegedly. It's been proven. So it happens everywhere. It happened in this part of the world too. And if we need to stamp it out, we need to also look in the mirror, and hopefully most people are, but I think it's important to point out.
Speaking of Olympics, Duane and I just did a special show, the first part of our 8-part miniseries on the Montreal 1976 Olympics, and let's not kid ourselves. I don't think Mayor Jean Drapeau is totally clean in getting the Olympics for 1976. Back then, you had to do what you had to do, and this was considered okay, but it is for sure an exchange of envelopes containing usually big amounts of money. Before we change topics, it is important every time we talk about Qatar to mention the allegations of slavery, of workers' human rights violations, and of course the amount of death that has been documented since the beginning of the constructions of the stadiums many years ago. So that is always part of the conversation. And it is another sad reality that stems from that day 9 years ago when Qatar was announced.
Yeah, for sure. And look, I don't think anything will happen during the 6 weeks of the games. I think that by holding them in November, although it is screwing up the schedules for everyone, and certainly that's problematic, but I think that will take just enough heat away that you will not see problems on the field, particularly if they can follow through with a little bit of their technology problems in terms of cooling things down. There was a World Track and Field Championships held there this year that, although not perfect by any means, no one died. So that's positive, to say the least. When it comes to the other stuff around this is a very complicated issue that is geopolitical in a lot of ways, of how those states think of people and how they treat workers. And, we're a symptom in terms of the sporting world of what happens there. It comes down to whether or not, when you're awarding these games, whether, again, as I started with, whether you think inclusion, which creates a certain exposure, is the best way to go, or whether you think exclusion by punishing is the better way to go. And as I say, I tend to lean on the inclusion side of things, but I do understand those that don't believe that this should be the case. And look, I say this as someone who could travel to Qatar probably without much problem. I am not a disadvantaged person. I'm not a person of color. I'm a cisgendered white male, right? I'm not going to have a problem over there because I can just avoid drinking for a while. That's the only thing I might get in trouble with. But there's going to be areas, right? There's going to be bud tents. It'll be fine. But if I was a gay black man, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't be going. And that's something that, should be said as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Before we move on to the Eurodraw, which is a second part of the show today, our special offer is valid all the way to Friday, but only until Friday. Every $5 Patreon members, date of Friday, 11 a.m., just before the start of the show, Eastern Time, will get access to the $10 tier of the Sports Podcast Network's Patreons. Very important patrons VIP section. The first documentary will be about the Gold Cup 2000, not 2000, I guess, won by Canada. You'll have a documentary about the interviews, about the games, some game reports, also how this tournament came to be, the qualification. It's a very intriguing tournament, and we'll give you an audio documentary before Christmas for the $10 tier of the Sports Podcast Network, available at patreon.com/Sports Podcast Network. And until Friday, and Friday only, you get $5 access for for $5 you get a $10 access. There we go, for 6 months. So make sure you go to our Patreon page, patreon.com/Sports Podcasting Network. All right, I'm done playing my salesman for today, Duane. Let's talk about the Euro draw, a draw for the ages that created not only a group of death, but I'm gonna call this group, because the letter of this group too. I don't know if you watch Aussie Man reviews, sometimes it's quite funny. This is Destination Fucked.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that reference. I'm not cool enough there, but I do. It's the group of super death, if you want to play it.
The fucked group. It's group fucked. It's group F. It is what it is.
Yeah. Best third place teams do advance in this tournament. So which I hate in general. If you're going to go 24, go 32, but which in Europe might as well just take them all in there. But at that point, I prefer the 16-team tournament.
Exactly. Why go through like a year of qualification if 32 out of 40 teams make it right now? Just have a draw. No, but yeah, Group F, what a group. First, the position A of this group is the playoff winner, number 8. We don't know yet. They're still in the qualification
Could be
process.
Iceland.
Iceland or?
I think the Hungary's in there as well, which was at the last European Championship and has some of the games would be there.
Yeah, I remember the goalkeeper playing with his gray sweatpants. That was from Hungary in the last year or 2 years ago.
Yeah.
About 4 years ago.
And it's nice that the playoff draws happen now, so because now the Euro draw makes sense. I'm not one that usually talks about how complicated draws are, because really, if you just take a second, you can figure them out, and you could with this. But it was of draws of qualification process is one of the more complicated ones that they've come up with. But
just because of the rules that you can't be in the same. You can have a team in the same group that you were in a group with in the qualifying process, and also, or in the same like regions. So no, it becomes complicated. But here's Group F, Destination F. It is the playoff winner of Group A, then Portugal, the defending champion of the 2016 Euro, then France, and then Germany. So that's quite the group here.
It's the winners of the last 3 major tournaments. In a single group, as I said, a best third place to come in there. And look, I mean, that's just say if you look at the 4 teams in the playoff for that, the one that jumps out at you is Iceland, and the great story that they've been over the past few years. But they're screwed in that group if they get in there. But that said, they might be able to pull a draw off, and that might be the difference for any of those top teams. Is really and how many goals they score against the third place team.
Yeah, exactly. And who knows if Iceland gets a win here? Germany's not your older brother's Germany, I guess. And you never know what can happen. We've seen it in the World Cup recently, right? And even in qualifying in the Nations League, it wasn't that good for Germany. They got relegated to the Group B in the Nations League under Joachim Löw. So no, it is quite an interesting group. And the camera was on Didier Deschamps, Carlos Queiroz, and Joachim Löw during the draw, and Didier Deschamps' reaction was like, "Oh my God, are you serious? All right, here we go. Strap on the boots. We got to do some work."
I mean, it's fun for fans too. I mean, honestly, you have basically, again, with a spoiler thrown in there, which if it's Iceland is a very appealing spoiler, against 3 powerhouses that are going to have to play each other, and only 2 are going to be guaranteed to go through. So those games take on a different level of importance. This is always what the Euro gives you that the World Cup doesn't necessarily give you, and it was kind of lost a little bit. Although the last European Championships was good once it got going. I mean, we were all a little concerned about the 24, but it turned out pretty well.
Yeah, you had great stories like you mentioned. Hungary, Iceland was a great story. The invention of the mainstream Viking claps that now can be seen across stadiums around the world came out of the 2016 Euro in France. Let's go through the groups quickly, Duane. Group A, Turkey, Italy, Wales, and Switzerland. Looking at this group, yes, you have a couple of powerhouses or former powerhouses, but this one could be interesting as well. Italy, Wales, Switzerland, I don't consider them equal, but they're not that far. The disparity between them is not that great, and that could be entertaining games to start off the championship.
The Swiss always seem to get out of groups. They never seem to get much further, but they always seem to get out of groups. So this is not really they're not an easy touch there. And obviously Wales has, we'll see how much Gareth Bale has left in the tank, and Ramsey, and whether they can pull some upsets there. It's of these groups in the middle for sure. As I said, Switzerland is a funny little team that they're, probably if you were to do a legitimate ranking, like not the FIFA rankings, but like a legitimate one, they'd be like a towards 20, but top 20 kind of ranked team that everyone kind of ignores and forgets because they're never going to go much lower and they're never going to go much higher.
That's true. And Italy want to avenge the lack of World Cup in 2018, so might be interesting there too. Group B, Denmark, Finland, Belgium, and Russia. Not necessarily easy games, but games that Belgium should be able to take care of. Finland, their first Euro participation in decades, with 2 Montreal Impact players, of course, playing for Finland. We're talking about Jukka Raitala and Lassi Lapalainen, who has his option picked up for 6 months. So probably be back with the Montreal Impact when the beginning of the training camp arrives, but he will be probably in the lineup and the roster for the Euro 2020. Same for Jukka Raitala. Denmark-Finland will be an interesting rivalry match. Scandinavian type of rivalry match. Belgium-Russia could be fun. Belgium will be tested maybe for the first time in a while because qualification was a breeze for the Belgium team.
Yeah, Belgium's one of the more interesting teams, obviously, in the world right now. Still ranked number 1 in the world in the FIFA rankings, which tells you that they're a little flawed because why wouldn't the world champions be ranked number 1? But anyway, certainly a very good team, and a team that in the World Cup stepped up and sort of proved that they were legit contenders. They didn't quite get it done, but obviously I would keep an eye on them. The Euros tend to allow for new winners a little more easily than the World Cup does, and it wouldn't be I don't think it'd be an upset anymore if they were to win, but certainly it would be a new face holding, standing in the confetti at the end. So obviously a team to watch.
Group C, the Netherlands, Ukraine, Austria, and the playoff winner of Group D, Netherlands, has finally seemed to turn things around and are back in a winning ways and are back in a major championship after missing the last two, I believe, at least for sure the World Cup in 2018. They were not present.
They weren't at the Euro either, yeah.
So that's what I thought too. So Netherlands, Ukraine, Austria, playoff winner of Group D. This is maybe the most open group of the entire group stage.
Yeah, the Dutch seem to have turned it around, winning the Nations League, as you say. They kind of remind me a little bit of Germany when they were emerging around 06. That they seem to have figured it back out again. Also comparison there when you look at their women's program as well, the double whammy that's happening, which is a reflection of the overall system. So, yeah, it's certainly a dark horse, I would suggest. Although, I don't know, can Netherlands be a dark horse, especially having won the Nations League for whatever that means? And I guess maybe that we'll find out what the Nations League means when we look at these results in the tournament.
What it has done is given more playing opportunity together for this group of players, and Memphis Depay has been the key player for the Netherlands as well. Group D, the mother country, England, Croatia, the playoff winner of Group C, and Czech Republic. England, Croatia will be an interesting matchup and a rematch from the World Cup in 2018. England hoping to change their fortune versus Croatia.
And the finals at Wembley. It's coming home.
It's gonna start again. And Gareth Bale and the vest and the Gareth Southgate vest. It's gonna happen again next summer.
Yeah, I think you'll hear that song a lot. Again. Let's hope they win one day so we no longer... It's a pretty bad song. When you really break it down, it's very of the time, we'll say.
I've been using it for different things too lately. All right, I'm watching something and someone's coming out. I'm like, yay, he's coming home. He's coming. Watching a movie.
Ball's coming home. Yeah.
It's always,
sorry, guys.
Funny.
Sorry. We'll promise we won't sing it again till
next summer.
To the summer.
So obviously England, Croatia are the two big favorites in this group. And the last group that we haven't talked about yet is Group E with Spain, Sweden, Poland, and the playoff winner B. That will be another close, I guess, type of group for at least position 2 and 3. But I do see Spain. Spain is undergoing, of course, a small, I don't want to say rebuild. You don't call rebuild at the national team level, but there's a change of guard, right? The Spain crop of 2008, 2010, and 2012 is starting to be all gone. It's a different generation. It's a different team, but we're going to see success, I believe, coming out of Spain. Sweden, Poland, hard to handicap, of course. It all depends on Lewandowski. If this player gets hot, Duane, if he scores 2 goals a game, they're going to be tough to beat. But it depends if they can defend. We've seen this. Poland might be the most MLS team in the Euro 2020.
Lewandowski's the most underrated player in the world right now. I watch a lot of Bayern Munich, so maybe I'm a little bit influenced by that. But absolutely, he's right there with the best players in the world at this moment. Spain is... I think you can compare Spain to Manchester City and to Barcelona because that's the style. I mean, really, they're highly influenced by that stylistic.
There's relationships there, right? Pep Guardiola, Barcelona, and Spain. It's like and Manchester City. You can draw a triangle between those 3 entities and their success over the last decade.
Yeah, and look, as we see with City, there's vulnerabilities that are being exposed this year. Part of that's personnel-wise. And some injuries, but nonetheless, if you're not perfect, there are ways that the modern game can expose that. And I think Spain's much the same way at the international level as teams evolve away from the purely possession focus, tiki-taka as it's known informally, to something that's a little more muscular, a little more direct, a little more athletic. And Spain has never necessarily prioritized players that do well in that system. I mean, that generation of Spanish teams were brilliant. And they had some muscular players that could certainly cause some havoc there. Certainly there's some of them are still playing, but that's maybe part of the problem there. I'm right now, as I'm speaking, I'm looking at a photo of David Silva. That guy at the peak of his power was able to sort of, through his skills, and just as one example, would be able to break down these teams and allow the system to flourish. Now that generation that has come behind them don't quite have the same sort of magic as the current one. They're still very good, but it just doesn't seem. It seems like that era is over. It seems like that era is over at a lot of levels, and it's only Manchester City's money, really, that allows them to continue to win with it. And I think that I have concluded again, and I'm comparing the two as a city observer, as a very close city observer, that they need to change up things soon to evolve to something that's closer to 2019 than 2009. Otherwise, they may find themselves in context in trouble. I saw that in the last few weeks. I've seen that in the Champions League. I've seen that against Newcastle. I saw that against Chelsea, even to a certain extent. And I think Spain's in the same way, that they need to evolve to something that matches, or at least allows them to maintain their own personality. And I'm not saying all teams have to play the same, but at the same time can address the challenges that come with trying to play that way against teams that are set up to be fast and direct and athletic and muscular.
Yeah, no, exactly. So it will be a fascinating revelation of the worthiness of the UEFA Nations League, and see if the results that we've seen there are replicable at the Euro 2020 for a different team. And we'll see Spain, and we'll see, of course, Belgium and England and France and Portugal. Maybe not going to defend. It's going to be hard, but we'll see all of this unfold next summer. And daily shows during the Euro, of course, will be available with Duane and I on Soccer Today. Euro After Show will be back next summer for sure on the Sports Podcast Network. Before we say goodbye, we're going to leave you with a thought, and you can think about it, and we'll talk about it tomorrow. The potential MLS schedule for 2020, Duane. Apparently, it's going to be 2 13-team conferences, 2 matches between everyone in the same conferences, so that's 24 games, and 10 games against 10 different team from the other conference. So there's 3 teams that you're not going to face every year. It's going to create maybe some advantages, maybe some disadvantages for teams. It's going to be, again, a controversy point, but that's something to think about for tomorrow.
And it will make the supporters shield truthers crazy, because it will not be anything close to a balanced schedule, which further devalues that award in the eyes of anyone who rationally thinks about it. But it is what it is. I mean, I do to this day believe that MLS is evolving towards 2 conferences that do not play against the other for the regular season. Maybe with 1 or 2 exceptions in there, like an interleague play sort of situation like we see in Major League Baseball. That's the only way you can really do it with the expansion levels the way they're going.
So that could be what happens in the future, as something just fell from the ceiling here. I don't know if you saw it on video, but everything is fine. On that note, we'll say goodbye for today. Make sure you follow Duane on social media at 24th Minute, myself at Kev Laramee, and until Friday only, get access to the $10 tier with every $5 tier pledge on our Patreon page, patreon.com/sportspodcasting for network. For more details, again, $5 a month will give you access to the $10 tier, which is the SPN documentary tier. And the first show is about soccer. It's about the Gold Cup 2000. So if you're a fan of Canadian soccer and the Canadian men's national team, you'll hear all about the most epic moment in the history of Canadian soccer in 2000. And get more at patreon.com/sportspodcasting network. And until tomorrow, for Duane Rollins, I'm Kevin Laramee. Have a great soccer.
You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.